In this chapter, we're talking basically about the heart of probably what most people think you're going to understand and focus your time on as an economist, which would be supply and demand, or demand and supply, doesn't matter which order we use it in. Um, this is an incredibly important chapter. So the fact that it's cited so much isn't unusual or disturbing to me. Um, it's what you would expect from a chapter that basically markets and heavily rely upon to understand the world. As we talked about in chapter 1 and chapter 2, markets are important. And the reason why markets are so important is that they tell us so much about, oh, sorry, I don't want the mark, I want this, don't I? Yeah. The reason why markets are so important is because they tell us what the prices should be. Right? So what we're going to see here is that we're going to talk about products like a house. And we're going to give it a Q, like for standing for quantity, a price with P, and we're going to have a demand curve and a supply curve. And we're going to get from supply and demand an answer to this question. Where do prices come from? They come from supply and demand. So let me just talk a little bit off slide here and just say why this is so important. I want you to kind of picture your mind back to a more troubling economic time, and that would be the Great Depression. So during the Great Depression, people were like, geez, markets really suck. Why do we deal with markets so much? They never seem to do any good for us. Why don't we just go to having socialism, right? Which is, I'm sure someone will disagree with me here in the slides here, but is a variation of communism, essentially, and having the markets do everything. Well, the central problem that even those in socialism realize is that they wouldn't know how to price things. So they had this idea that as technology was becoming better, they could have, right, and so now we're talking kind of like 1940s, 1950s, is that maybe they could have computers, or, kind of the earlier renditions of computers. Computers solve all these things without having a market, simulate what a market would do, and put that price on it. It's really tough to do, one. And two, things change quickly enough that probably the model would go outdated. Here's the beauty for me for markets and prices is that you can be incredibly lazy and get a lot of information. How do I want to put this? So for me, for instance, I don't care. I don't really care about certain things that people care a great deal about, and there are certain things that others care a great deal about. I'm sorry, that I care a great deal about that others don't care about. So how do we understand those two together? We understand those two together by thinking about what the prices are, right? And what we can say, right, essentially is that the prices are too high for certain things that I don't care about that the rest of society does. Whereas I'm like, damn, that's a great deal for things that I really care about that others don't. And, the one example I can give is Burger King in like the early 2000s did this, like, how like when you get the kids meal you get like a toy, and obviously I'm too old to be buying toys that come with food, but apparently they got Stan Lee, the comic book guy, to make members of the Backstreet Boys, the band, the old band, into superheroes or supervillains or whatever. And I was like, damn, that's such a cool cross mix between the two. Well, let's see what they did here. I'm not. I did not plan this, but let's just look at what. Let's go on eBay and see what it is. I'm not sure what it's called here. Look at that, $3, as I described it. Oh damn! Look at this. I'm almost thinking about getting this. The whole set for $12.95. Come on, that's a great deal. Now see, here's the thing. Right, the beauty of the market. The beauty of the market is that people can feel like this about certain things and be like, dude, I'm going to totally buy that thing. Some of these are still in the like packages and whatnot. I mean, come on. And some of you are saying, why would anyone ever want to pay good money for one of those things? That's the beauty of the market. The market doesn't make those kinds of decisions. We get to make those kinds of decisions as people, buying things or not buying things until it all works out. And I like that. There's just a certain aspect for me. I like that authorities don't get to tell me what I have to buy or whatnot. I get to choose based on the interaction of the demand and the supply curve. Okay, so let's get into the slides. We are going to look at all these. Nothing to be missed here. Ah, yes. The water bottle. It has certainly become fashionable. But even this set of slides, which apparently comes in the future, 2025, even the Yeti Rambler, I'm not sure it's necessarily a cult favorite now. Because now everyone's buying, what's the bottle that everyone's buying? Someone that starts with Owala or something. Everyone's buying that one now. So even things change. And when I was in college, it was the Nalgene bottle. Everyone was getting that one. So things change for some reason. Right now, if you wanted to buy a Nalgene bottle, I'm sure it'd be really cheap. Even the Yeti Rambler, I'm sure, is getting cheaper now as people are buying the Owala one. And what we see, right, is that for many people, many firms, they have to engage in an active marketing campaigns and whatnot to influence prices, right? Which actually gives some value to those of you who are marketing majors. We are going to presume throughout this chapter that we have a perfectly competitive market. We're going to understand the basis of this. In your microeconomics, your Econ 130 class, you'd look at this even much more so. But we're going to just assume here for the moment that we have a market with lots of buyers and sellers. All the products are the same. And anyone can enter at any time they want to. Okay, so we're just going to say this market is incredibly competitive. And so we need to look at two sides of the market, the demand side and the supply side. So let's start with the demand. When we want to look at market demand, we're looking at the demand. So I'm just trying to get this to work here. Apparently it doesn't want to. There we go. We're looking at the demand by all consumers. Okay, so that's for the entire market. And then we can understand this market demand curve as people collectively deciding how much they're willing to pay, the price, and how much quantity they would receive. This is for a single market. This would be the water market. And we could imagine that in one way I could have this as a schedule, or in other words, a table, where I list various price and quantity combinations that give us these points on the demand curve. And the entire curve itself is a function where it says that the quantity is a function of a bunch of different things. One of those things also being the price of the product. And what we are seeing here is that this is an inverse relationship. Meaning that as the price goes up, the quantity goes down. And as the price goes down, the quantity goes up. So what that curve shows us is that relationship. And what we're seeing here is that that relationship is one of these variables being inverse to one another, moving in the opposite direction. That inverse relationship has a name. That is called the law of demand. And what that says to us is that holding everything else constant, or as economists tend to like to call it, ceteris paribus, holding everything else constant, that as the price falls, the quantity demanded will increase. Why am I saying that now? Not demand, but quantity demanded. So while this is the demand curve, the entire relationship is the demand curve, this is filled with quantity demanded points. And so we can see here is that I'm moving along the curve. That as the price falls, let's put it another way here, as the price falls, demand doesn't change. What do I mean by that? I mean the curve didn't shift, right? The curve doesn't move at all as the price is falling. Instead, I'm moving along the curve to a different quantity demanded point. And that's what we see right here. How much you're willing and able to purchase at a particular price. This is really important, and I don't think the book is going to emphasize it enough here. You have to both be willing and able to buy the good at that price. I don't know why I keep going back to this example. No, I can actually. I can use a different example. Just from my everyday life here. Remember how, well, you might not remember, but back in, right when COVID started, it was really, really difficult to get a appliance. And that was exactly the same time that I had moved from an apartment to a house. So the house came with a really, really old fridge, like really old. It was from like the mid 80s. It was really, really bad, and it didn't keep things very cold. So it was really difficult to even just find a new fridge. I needed a fridge, right? I needed this fridge, but I just wasn't able to purchase it at that given price. The price was either too high for the ones that were immediately available, or I'd have to wait too long for other ones. So we're in what now, 4 years past COVID. I finally am presented with prices for refrigerators that are more affordable, right? And I'm finally getting it delivered on Saturday. So in like 2 days, I will have a new fridge. Both of these conditions have to be fulfilled. And we can think about this for a variety of things, right? So willing, when we say that we're willing to buy something, here we're saying something about my preferences. Like, do I want to buy that thing? And when we're saying able, we're kind of saying, is it affordable? Both of these conditions have to be satisfied for me to buy something. I have to both want it and I have to be able to afford it. I'd wanted that fridge. I'd wanted a fridge for a long time, but the price was too high. Finally, 4 years after COVID started, prices are more reasonable for refrigerators, and so now it meets my affordability condition as well as my preference condition. Both have to exist for me to be buying the good. And that generally what we see is that as the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. As the price falls, quantity demanded rises. And you're going to see me writing it this way. Quantity demanded is going to be Q subscript D. As price falls, quantity demanded rises. And the inverse. As the price rises, quantity demanded falls. Right, so as houses become more and more expensive, fewer people are buying them. Not because they've all of a sudden decided they don't want to live in a house. They do. It's just that it's no longer affordable. So the law of demand is essentially saying that this tends to happen. As the price changes, it leads to a change in the quantity demanded. And it's in that direction. Price changing causes quantity demand to change. There's a causal relationship between the two. And we see that causal relationship caused by two things. First, that people, when the price falls, two things happen. First, the product will become cheaper relative to other goods. All right, so if you can think of my budget and what I all spend money on, if the price is falling and it's now cheaper relative to other goods, then I will buy more of it. It's just lower in cost. And then at the same time as that's happening, if we looked at it in terms of my purchasing power, right? So if my income isn't changing, let's say it's $1,000 a month. It's not what my income is, but let's just say it's $1,000 a month. If my income is $1,000 a month and that good has fallen in price, I can buy more of them with my $1,000. So in essence, I feel richer. And when people feel richer, they buy more of it. So both of these things are happening at the same time. Both the substitution effect as well as the income effect. And what we would generally say here is that as the price falls, people are going to substitute towards the good, and they're going to feel richer, and thus buy more. And so we can start to see this here, right? So now again, we're drawing this curve as ceteris paribus, meaning nothing else is changing. We said that this demand is a function. It's a function of a bunch of different variables. What we want to say here is that let's keep all of the variables except one constant, don't have them change, and allow only the price to change. So ceteris paribus says that we're just keeping all the other variables constant and only changing the price. And so what the law of demand says, just to restate that the law of demand is saying ceteris paribus, meaning holding everything else constant, as the price falls, the quantity demanded increases, or as the price rises, the quantity demanded falls. Quantity demanded, not demand, quantity demanded. Now, what we can also see, though, is that we can sometimes shift the entire curve. Now what we're doing is we are relaxing ceteris paribus. We're allowing the entire curve to shift. And if it shifts to the right, that would be an increase in demand. And if it shifts to the left, that would be a decrease in demand. So the question is, why? Like, what is going to change? How is it going to change that's going to cause these shifts to the right or to the left? And what we're going to see is that this is, I'm going to write this out here. This is not the law of demand. The law of demand is not at work here. This is actually saying that demand is either increasing, like we are here, or that demand is decreasing, like it is there. Or that the quantity demanded is changing at each and every price. Meaning, if I were to draw a horizontal line at the price of, let's say, $10, there'd be a quantity there. There'd be a much higher quantity here. And a lower quantity there. But we can see that the quantity is lower at each and every price here, and that the quantity is higher at each and every price here. So what are those other things? Those other things would be income, prices of related goods, tastes, population demographics, expected future prices, natural disasters. So what this means here is that demand is a function of price. And let's just number these to make our life easy here. So I'm just going to number these other variables. It's a function of the price and all of these other variables. When we were under ceteris paribus, we just held those other variables constant. Now we're saying if they change, then it shifts the curve. So in essence, what we're saying is when these change, then the curve shifts. So let's look at the variable number one. Variable number one being the change in income. Well, we can see this in our lives, I guess, or I can certainly see it in mine. And this would be the situation where my purchase of goods and services has changed as I have earned more income. And what we see is that most goods are what we would call normal goods, meaning that income and demand move in the same direction. Income and demand move in the same direction. And what that means is that poor people, right? If I just lost my job, meaning my income went down. If I lost my job, I'm not going to do any of these three things, right? I'm not going to buy new clothes, not going to go out to a restaurant, not going to take a vacation. If I get a promotion and my income goes up, or I win the lottery, then I'm going to do all three of these things, right? So they move in the same direction. 80 to 90% of all goods are normal goods. However, there are some goods that are what are called inferior goods. I like the best example I think of so this would be, just to write this out and be formal here. So this would be saying is that income and demand move in the opposite direction. And let's say I win the lottery. I've never heard a person win the lottery and say, I'm going to buy an annual bus pass, meaning that they're going to ride the bus more. Right? They probably would say, I'm totally going to buy a new car. I'm going to stop taking the dumpy bus. Meaning that their demand for bus rides went down as their income went up. On the other hand, if I lost my job, I'm probably going to get rid of my car and start riding the bus. Right? And so these inferior goods would require, in essence, a different marketing strategy even than normal goods would. And so that's what we would see here, is that I would have to tell you two things. I would have to tell you what the change in income is. So when I write the delta, that just means change. I'd have to tell you the change in income and whether it is normal or inferior. So I'd have to tell you both things. Is income going up or down? And I would have to tell you if it's normal or inferior. So an example would be income's going up and it's an inferior good, then demand for that good will do what? Go down. Because people are richer, they're going to stop taking the bus as much. Okay, variable number 2. Changes in the prices of related goods. There's two kinds of relationships that exist, substitutes and complements. This is just one of the very, very few idiosyncrasies of me shedding. Complements is spelled with an E, not an I. Complement with an I would be like, you're good looking. It's not like that. This is complements with an E, meaning that they're used together. So let's talk about substitutes, which would be pretty obvious, that you could buy one or the other, right? You could live with one or the other. Complements would be that they're used together. I get fries when I get a Big Mac. I buy a left shoe when I also have a right shoe. I go to the gym. I also need a reusable water bottle. Pencil and eraser, right? That'd be another example. Substitutes would be like oranges versus clementines. You could imagine using one or the other. But what we see here now, let's look at this just in a slightly different way here. Let's do my example of oranges and clementines. So clementines, in case you don't know, are like mini oranges. They taste the same, they're easier to peel, but they're basically substitutes. Okay, so let's say that I tell you that the price of oranges is falling. What do you know now? What do you know with certainty? Before I even tell you anything else, what do you know with certainty? You know from the law of demand that the quantity demanded of oranges is going to do what? Go up. That's the law of demand. Sorry, I keep hitting this one little button here. So that's our law of demand. But if I'm buying more oranges, that would mean my demand for clementines will go down. Because I'm just basically going to substitute my citrus needs, and I'm going to do it by buying oranges rather than clementines, which would mean that we've got two markets now. In my oranges market, we've got price and quantity, and I'm moving along the demand curve, right, from the law of demand. But here, you can see that in the clementines market, I've got a shift in demand. That demand is falling. And so that's what exists here when we have substitutes existing. Now let's look at it with complements. As for me, it'd be very difficult to eat pizza without drinking soda. That the two go well together, that they are complements. And so this would be pizza and soda. Okay, so let's say that the price of pizza falls. What do we know with certainty? We know that the quantity demanded of pizza will rise. Again, we know this from the law of demand. But if people are buying more pizzas, what is that going to mean for soda? They're going to buy more of it because they use the two together. So because these are complements, what we're going to see is the pizza market, the situation where the same movement is occurring along the demand curve to the right, just as we had here for oranges. But now for soda, because of the complementary relationship between the two, that the demand will increase or shift to the right. So depending on the type of good that we have here, which again this is variable 2, depending on the type of variable we have here, whether that product is a substitute or complement, will determine how changing the price of one good affects the demand for the other. Notice with the law of demand, I'm not violating any rules here. But the law of demand is not causing this shift. The law of demand is this. The law of demand is that. This is not the law of demand. And this is not the law of demand. That's caused by a change in the price of either the substitute good or the complementary good. Okay, this one's a lot easier here. Oh, what to say about this one? Tastes and preferences are changed quite a bit, and I guess the best way to understand this would be, I guess this is why TikTok and Instagram and all those social media influencers exist as people, right? And so we have this example here where if influencers successfully advertise reusable water bottles, they affect consumer tastes. I guess that's why companies pay for influencers. We might think that influencers aren't doing anything useful for the economy, but that would be pretty negative to see here. They are doing something positive. Their goal is essentially marketing to try to shift the demand curve. Oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't ever think about that. I guess people are wearing hats less because wearing a hat in a car doesn't work as well. So because they're not wearing hats in cars, then people don't need to, and they're just dressing less formally. They don't need hats as much. It's interesting. For a fourth factor, we could also change the population and demographics. We see a lot of concern about this in people, with the fact that people are having less children. So because people are having less children, then people aren't buying as much diapers. They're not, buying as much baby clothes. And the real long-term concern is then fewer kids would go to college. So I don't know. I hear a lot of administrators quite often complaining about the fact that, 15 years from now or something like that, that because fewer children are being born now, 15 years later, we're all going to see it. And we're going to see it caused by the fact that there are fewer, that there's fewer kids in my classroom. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they say. But we would see this exact same thing here, is that as the demographics change, the race, the gender, the age of people changes, that changes, or just the number of people in general, that would change our overall number of consumers or our overall demand curve. So this would be, for instance, an increase in the population would cause this increase in the product. Huh, interesting. Because I eat canned tuna almost every day. And someone's probably hearing that in this lecture and being like, Scheiding, you're so old. So apparently canned tuna is struggling to connect with younger generations. I don't really like motorcycles, so I guess. I don't know. I don't have a water bottle at all, so I guess. Okay, let's look at variable number 5 here. I think that's what we're up to. Yeah, 5. So here we're talking about expectations about future prices. So here we're changing our demand now based on what we're expecting the future price to be. And this would be like the equivalent of either storing more stuff in your house to then consume, or that you're saying, I will use up the stuff in my house before I go out and buy stuff. So the simple idea here is that if I expect the future price to be higher, I'll buy more stuff now. So this would be the expect future price to be higher. So if I expect the future price to be higher, then my demand will shift to the right. Otherwise, what I would expect is that if I expect the future price to be lower, then I'll wait to buy the good as much as I can, and my demand will go down. So this, in some sense, is also kind of affecting this fridge purchase for me, was that I realized that a lot of the problems were being caused by the fact that prices were so high, supply chain constraints, all that kind of stuff. Well, I was like, well, it can't last forever. Eventually, at some point, the supply chain will get fixed and prices will go down in the future. So I essentially just bought a really cheap, small fridge and just said I can wait the 4 years, I guess, for prices to go down. And essentially that meant that my demand in the present went down while I waited for the price to fall. And then the other part to this that would affect demand and supply would be things like natural disasters, or I see they added this after COVID, pandemics, I suppose, where you can imagine big shifts in demand caused by the fact that these one-off events are happening. And so we could see this here, that when COVID occurred, that people stopped going to restaurants, concerts, or in the case of Hawaii, traveling all the way to Hawaii. But then people did buy more refrigerators, I guess, because they were renovating their home, something along those lines. This is a very important slide. This is slide 24 of 55. Do not go any further in this lecture if you don't understand this slide. Let's take it bullet by bullet point here. A change in the price of the product causing a movement along the curve, that right there is my law of demand. That is a change in the quantity demanded. That is a movement along the curve. And that's what we see from A to B. That's a movement along the curve caused by the fact that as the price went from $30 to $25, people were like, hey, this, I'm guessing it's water bottle, this water bottle is cheaper. I'm going to buy more of them because it is cheaper. So even if you just, so if you use the words, the quantity demanded changed, or in this case specifically, that the quantity demanded increased, because that is what's happening here. That quantity demanded increased. Graphically, that looks like a movement along the curve. This is employing ceteris paribus, obviously, because we are using the law of demand. And so that's only, in this case, we're just saying changing the price leads to changes in the quantity demanded. That's our movement. It looks like this, either an increase or a decrease. That is very different than changing the whole demand. So that would be variables 1 through 6. So here we're saying the entire demand curve shifts. And it's caused when something other than the price changes. So we're not using ceteris paribus anymore. In other words, we say that demand changes. In this case, we're going from A to C, which would be an increase in demand. Okay, so again, pause the lecture, redo the lecture for this slide at least. Slide 24 is incredibly important, and there will be many questions on the exam about this slide, slide 24. Do not proceed further unless you understand slide 24. I'm even going to do a monumental pause here just to highlight it. Okay, let's keep going. Now let's look at the other side of this market, the supply side of this market. And let's do the exact same process here to understanding it. Let's start first with market supply. So this would be how much stuff the firms are providing at the different prices. And what we would see here is the same thing. We could have a supply schedule where we talk about the various prices and how much quantity would be provided. And we could graph that out. We could graph out the supply curve, and we'd see this exact same thing, where we'd see that as the price goes up, people are willing to supply more, that companies are willing to supply more. And again, we can make this same distinction. the same distinction here is that we are going to have that as the price goes up, firms are going to want to make more of it because they could make more money in essence, and that the law of supply would say that ceteris paribus, that as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up, or that as the price goes down, the quantity supplied goes down. Ceteris paribus, meaning holding a bunch of different variables constant, which would mean, again, this would be a movement along the supply curve caused by price changes. And what we would also see is that we could shift the curve, but the shifting of the curve would be caused by something other than the price changing. So we could obviously cause a shift of the curve. We could decrease supply or increase supply. Shifting to the right would be the increase, so here would be saying supply increases. As opposed to, again, the previous slide where we're saying quantity supplied is changing. Quantity supplied, in this case, is if we're moving to the right along it, we're increasing. And what we're seeing here is that that shift can occur even if the price isn't changing, and again, it's changing at each and every price. So if I were to draw, again, a constant price here of, let's say, the same price here, $10, that we would see that the quantity is lower here and the quantity is much higher here. Right? This is saying that at each and every price, the quantity supplied is either less or it is more compared to S1. Which now gives us, again, a number of different variables that are in that supply function. So again, we're doing the same kind of discussion here of, I didn't mean to do that. We're saying that the supply is a function of the price and of variables 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then again, essentially, under ceteris paribus, we hold these constant under ceteris paribus. And that we essentially say under the law of supply that ceteris paribus, again, it's a Latin term meaning all else equal, that under ceteris paribus, that as the price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, or that as price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. That's all well and good. Now we're going to say that we can shift supply by relaxing ceteris paribus. And this obviously, just go back over here. This is a movement along the curve where it looks like this. a movement along the curve. Over here, now essentially what we're going to be saying is that the entire curve shifts. So this is an increase in quantity supplied. This is an increase in supply. Very different things. Increase in quantity supplied is a movement along the curve. Increase in supply is a shift of the curve. So now what we need to do is look at each of these 6 variables again. One of the very important ones that affects the supply curve is the price of inputs. Obviously, whenever a company is making something, they have to use a lot of resources to make it. And the price of those inputs matter. So when we say all these like supply chain problems, right, when that was like the key phrase to be using, essentially what they were saying was that prices were going up. That was the narrative. Is that the prices for things were going up because all the other things were going up in price, like workers' wages, transportation, all these things were becoming more expensive, and so the price of goods had to go up. So that was what everyone kept saying was the source of inflation, was supply chain problems. And what they meant was that the supply curve was shifting. And more specifically, when the price of inputs goes up, it causes a decrease in supply. Because essentially what that would mean is that at any given price, let's say again they're selling this thing for $10, now they don't want to sell as much because the inputs used to make that product are going up, so they're not making as much profit. And that when the price of inputs goes down, that would be an increase in supply. I guess you can read that more formally over here. And, sorry, and I should have done that too. Sorry, I forgot to do that. That was my variable 1. Here's my variable 2. So technological change, it's really a different way of understanding changes in inputs, the price of inputs. And specifically, what we would say here is that the inputs become less expensive if we have positive new technology that allows it. So, right, all the excitement seems right now to be around AI and how cool AI is, and especially in my job, I'm supposed to be like making assignments that AI can grade, and I don't know. Or what was the other one? Oh, they want me to use AI to be able to answer your like class questions. So instead of me answering your questions, I'm supposed to just send you to AI with the idea that now they can make me do other stuff, I guess. Well, generally speaking, positive technological change would lead to the supply curve increasing or shifting to the right. But what I'm also noticing is that there's like academics, people that are probably much more scholarly than me, are saying, oh my God, I can't believe they would send students to use AI. We need to stop companies from doing this. We need to stop Scheiding from using AI to do this. So, right, so this would be either negative technological change, but most of the time what we're talking about here is restrictions on using a new technology does cause an increase in the price because you're decreasing the supply curve. So this is variable 2. And then we have, for variable 3, these are what we call substitutes in production. So we have the same kind of relationship here. We still have the substitutes and the complements, but now we're coming at it from the instead of the consumption perspective, like that I could eat oranges and clementines. Now we're coming at it from the production standpoint, that I could use my factory to make cars or trucks, or that in this case I could use my field to grow corn or soybeans. That's essentially the same. Now, same kind of relationship exists as it did for consumption. The firm is going to look at what the prices are for the various things they could produce and then make a decision based on those various prices. So let's do substitutes in production. So let's say these are substitutes and the price of corn goes up. Then we're essentially saying, of course they would want to, make more corn, right? Essentially, so if the price of corn goes up, then we know that the quantity supplied of corn will also go up. But if they're using their field now to grow all this corn, that would mean by default that the supply of soybeans would fall. So the price of corn is going up and they supply less soybeans because they're going to grow other things. And that's what you're seeing here in this picture here. And so here we are using the law of supply. And essentially in the corn market, you're seeing movement along the curve. Where the quantity is going up. But in the soybean market, you are not using the law of supply. Here you have a whole shift to the curve with a decrease in supply. The alternative to the substitutes in production are the complements in production. I always love this example. As a person who's not a vegetarian, this would be that if I were in the beef business, meaning I'm taking the insides out of the cow to eat them, I probably am also going to wear their skin. So that would be the leather. So as I change my production of beef, it's also going to, as a consequence, change my production of leather. So here, for the complements, that as the price of beef goes up, then the quantity supplied of beef will also go up, right? That's law of supply. Right, and would just look like a movement along the curve. It would also mean that my supply of leather is also going to go up because I'm just going to have more beef, so I'm going to have more cow skin to sell. And so my supply curve is going to increase. Again, notice that very big difference. It depends on whether I have substitutes or complements in production, but I can have the same first event happening, the price of the good going up. And depending on whether they are substitutes or complements, it can cause a very different change in the supply curve of the substitute in production or of the complement in production. And then we can look at the future prices. Again, for some firms at least that can store their product, like for instance, if you're drilling for oil, then you might change how much you're willing to provide based on the future expected price. If I expect the future price of oil to go up, then I probably won't want to drill that much now and kind of wait until the future. And based on COVID again, we come up with another example of where we could look at natural disasters and pandemics where they generally would reduce the supply. This again would be more so our supply chain interruptions was our decrease in supply. Did I forget one? Oh, just they moved 4 and 5 together here. Sorry. And this one's 6. Which means, did they do the same thing here? Yeah. 4 and 5. And that should be 6. Maybe? I don't know. Whatever. You get the idea. I'm not gonna keep messing up my slides here. Okay. Here you can look at this fancy chart here, but we are now one of the largest producers. We are the largest producer of oil in the world, largely because of fracking, which essentially means that on the mainland, places that we normally expected not to be producing lots of oil, like North Dakota or western Wisconsin, now produce a lot of oil because of these different technological methods at which we can now get more oil out of the ground. Now, we put all of this, so this would be the equivalent of the slide 24. Slide 35, again, very important. This is our movements versus shifts. So let's create our line here. So law of supply. That would be my A to B. That as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. That's my movement along the curve. And I'm using ceteris paribus, keeping all my other variables constant. Otherwise, let's say B to C, or essentially S1 to S2, is a shift of the curve. And here we'd be saying supply increases, not quantity supplied, but supply. And this change of supply is coming from relaxing ceteris paribus. Meaning, again, the only way this one changes is because we changed the price. This one changes because we changed something in variables 1 through 6. Again, just like slide 24, do not go past slide 37 unless this is clear to you, this difference between the two. Now, what we need to do is put it all together. And this is kind of the cool part of this chapter, is that then we're going to put together our supply curve and our demand curve. And we're going to create for ourselves a demand curve and a supply curve. In these 2 points where they meet, that is an equilibrium. And in an equilibrium, we're essentially saying that the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Those 2 points on those 2 curves are equal to each other, not demand equals supply. I mean, to be technical here, the curves are equaling each other at that one point, but the curves themselves are not equal at each and every point. It's that the points are equal. The quantity demanded point on the demand curve is equal to the quantity supplied point on the supply curve. And this is a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful picture, if only because no one's forcing it to be anything. This is just what the market dictates the price should be. No price is a wrong price. It's what the market wants it to be. And so this is what we see here, that for the equilibrium, where there will be no tendency for change, we'll see that the price in this case settles at $20 and that the quantity is 5. And we would not expect the price to change or the quantity to change unless the supply and demand functions change, like the whole function changes. And the problems that emerge in markets sometimes is that the price is wrong. But fortunately, the market fixes that. So at 25, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, right? Here's my quantity supplied. Here's my quantity demanded at the price of 25. In other words, 6 is greater than 4. So how do sellers respond to that? We see this all the time, right? Is that the sellers generally are going to reduce the price. Holy cow. What happens then? So, here's a surplus. And then what we're saying, essentially, is that sellers respond by lowering the price. And as they lower the price, what do we know happens? Quantity demanded rises, and as the price is lowered, quantity supplied increases. We know that from the various laws, meaning that we move along the demand curve, we move along the supply curve as the price falls. Now I drew several arrows there because it's not like you know that the price is 20, right? Unless you're looking at this graph. Sellers are kind of guessing. So they're just going to keep lowering and lowering the price down and down and down, and people will buy stuff, but maybe they won't because they think the price is going to fall further, until we get to a point where there's no surplus anymore, where we're at the market equilibrium. And then it can work in the opposite way too, where what happens when the price is too low? So at $10, the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. In other words, 7 is greater than 3. And what do we see when a shortage exists? Is that sellers raise their prices. So the price goes up, and as the price goes up, what do we know happens? Quantity demanded falls, quantity supplied increases. We know that from the laws of supply and demand. In other words, the price goes up from 10 eventually to 20, and that we move along the supply and demand curves. Let's just add the other one in here from the previous slide. And so look at that. All that we require here is for producers to be able to change the price as they want to. As long as we don't stop sellers from being able to change their price, then shortages and surpluses will be eliminated. I'll repeat that again. As long as we allow sellers to adjust their prices freely, then the net result is that we will see that we'll have a market equilibrium, neither a shortage nor a surplus. So shortages and surpluses can't exist in a well-functioning market. The only times you ever get shortages and surpluses is if you restrict the ability of the seller to adjust their price. And we do see this. Well, we're right now in August of 2024, we're seeing this debate about can grocery stores change the prices for the food that they're selling. Or we see this here in Hawaii where we see restrictions on the prices for we see restrictions on the prices of houses. I don't know. I'm not generally let everyone off to themselves, but there is a advantage to allowing anyone to charge what they want to, and that would be that we generally will find the equilibrium. So there we go. The price itself is determined by that interaction of the buyers and the sellers. No one's dictating the prices. So again, I'll write this out here. As long as the price freely adjusts, then there are no shortages or surpluses. Now, what happens when we change some of our supply and demand curves? In other words, what if we do something called comparative statics, which is basically the way that economists try to predict changes in the prices based on certain events happening. And so the way that we would understand that here is, in this case, what if some event happens? In this case, what if the income goes, in this example here, if income goes up and it's a normal good, not a moral good, I was trying to write normal good, then the demand will shift to the right. But look at what happens. The equilibrium price goes up and the equilibrium quantity goes up. So demand shifts, it increases. Supply stays the same. So we had an event happen. Income went up and it was a normal good. Then we can predict that the price will rise and that the quantity will rise. And we can see that here. There'll be a movement along the supply curve and a shift of the demand curve. And we can also change the supply curve. In this case, what are they doing here? They have a new firm. So more firms, so the event here would be more firms. So we have more firms, then supply increases, shifts. And what that does is it leads to price falling and quantity rising. We have a movement along the demand curve and a shift of the supply curve. But we can predict as economists now what will happen to the equilibrium price and quantity in the market given a certain event happening. And we can see this here, right? That we could answer these questions. We can answer these questions with general direction. We just need to know, we would need more information if we wanted to know how much they were changing, because we would need to know how much the supply is shifting. Because if I shifted it a lot, then what we could see is that it would change the price a lot. So we wouldn't know more information about how much things are changing unless we knew how much the curve was shifting. And so then we can kind of create a chart or a table that would say how things would change with the quantity and price based on certain curves shifting. The complications come from the fact of when I change two curves. Then you actually need to know a bit more information. So in this case, I have more firms and income is increasing. And I'm guessing we're assuming this is a normal good still. So if I were grading this person, I would say we don't have enough information here. You would have to say that it's also a normal good. So I do see an error in the slides here. I don't make the slides, by the way. Pearson and all of its godliness makes the slides. But I guess this is why you have a PhD economist here teaching you that the slides are wrong. They also would need to say that they have a normal good. Then I would know to shift the demand curve. And it looks like it's shifting more than supply. Because otherwise, you could imagine, if I didn't know that I could have three differently driven scenarios. So let's just draw demand and supply for each of these. And now, let's have supply and demand shifting by about the same amount. Then let's have one where supply is shifting less than demand. And then let's have one where demand is shifting less than supply. In all three scenarios that I've drawn here, quantity has increased, right? Quantity, the old equilibrium quantity is less than the new equilibrium quantity. But depending on the magnitude of the shift of the two curves, in this case my equilibrium price stayed the same. In this scenario, my equilibrium price went up. And in this scenario, my equilibrium price, oh yeah, sorry. I can't get it back, I don't think. Oh, can I? There we go. Sorry. There we go. But in this scenario here, my price went down. So the price moved in all directions. So price, we don't know. We don't know the price unless I tell you demand shifted more than supply, like that the magnitude of the changes. Otherwise, price is indeterminate. And so that's what you kind of will see here in these slides, is that they draw these kind of different pictures. One where demand shifted more than supply, and then the other one where supply shifted more than demand. So another way of saying this is that there's some ambiguity in how the price is moving if you don't know enough about enough information about how things are changing. So you would need more information. But that the quantity moves in an unambiguous way, meaning there's no scenario where it did not increase. And so that's what we see here. So this would be slide 51, would be another good slide to kind of commit to. And the ones where you see that it increases, decreases, or is unchanged would mean that price is the ambiguous variable. Here, quantity is the ambiguous variable. here quantity is the ambiguous variable, and that here price is the ambiguous variable, and that the other one is the unambiguous, the one that is with certainty that we know how it's changing. Okay. We already talked about this, but this would be that slide 24, I think, and 37. Here's another slide of it, slide 54. Very, very important that you clearly understand the differences between shifting a curve and moving along a curve. So we have 3 slides that all talk about the same thing, and me pausing a great deal just to highlight what that difference is. Okay.